Labeling of products has always been a fundamental WHMIS element and has no doubt helped in preventing workers from getting sick or hurt since WHMIS first went into force in 1988. As with anything though, there's always room for improvement. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand why the new labels are an improvement over the old ones, what's required to be displayed on WHMIS 2015 labels, and what information needs to be communicated to your workers. Among other things, WHMIS 2015 communicates new requirements for labeling hazardous products. The new labeling system is aimed at introducing better communication of the dangers involved in handling hazardous materials, implementing standardized labeling principles that eliminate inconsistencies from country to country, of course promoting worker safety, and even boosting international trade on controlled products between Canadian companies, the United States, and other Canadian trading partners. WHMIS labels are still required to be added to hazardous products by manufacturers and suppliers before the products are provided to buyers. And still, as an employer, you're responsible for making sure that any hazardous product that comes into your workplace is properly labeled. You're also responsible for making sure that workplace labels are applied when necessary. So WHMIS 1988 labels haven't been replaced but have been absorbed and improved using GHS recommended labeling, ultimately converting them into superior, universal types of labels called WHMIS 2015 labels. That label really needs to stop skipping leg day. So what's the difference anyways? Well, here's what the new labels are required to display. First of all, every label has to have a product identifier. The product identifier includes the brand name, common name, chemical name, generic name, or the trade name of the product. Also, every label needs to include an initial supplier identifier. This includes the name, physical address, and phone number of either the Canadian importer or the Canadian manufacturer. Of course, just like the old labels having to bear WHMIS symbols, these new labels need to have pictograms. Remember, labels may contain more than one pictogram depending on the hazards associated with the product. We'll be learning a lot more about pictograms in the next lesson. A signal word is used to indicate the severity of the hazard and to alert the user of a potential risk. There are only two recommended signal words: danger or warning. Warning is used for hazards with less risk, while danger is used for high-risk hazards. Some hazard categories actually call for no signal words at all. Every label has to have a hazard statement. These are standardized phrases describing the hazard associated with the product. Examples of these statements include things like fatal if inhaled, extremely flammable gas, causes eye irritation, may cause cancer, and may explode when heated. Clear and to the point. Precautionary statements are standardized phrases describing the measures that need to be taken to prevent or minimize the negative effects caused by improper handling, storage, or exposure to the product. These statements include phrases like keep container tightly closed, protect from sunlight, and wear protective gloves. Again, super clear, very concise, and to the point. Supplementary information includes additional information that can help the user better understand the hazards of the product. This could include things like routes of exposure, first aid measures, physical states, and possibly even hazards that aren't yet included in the GHS. And finally, labels must be bilingual. A container can either have one label containing both French and English information, or two separate labels, each containing one of the languages. So here's some other essential features of WHMIS 2015 labels. They must be prominently and clearly displayed on the product container. They have to sufficiently contrast with all other information on the container. They have to be easy to read. Of course, they need to be accurate, and they must be durable and moisture resistant. We covered the transition phase in the last lesson, and it should be noted again that WHMIS 2015 labels will likely be introduced gradually into most workplaces. During this time, employers and workers are expected to learn about old and new WHMIS labeling practices. Okay, so what about your roles and responsibilities as an employer when it comes to labels? The most important thing is that you need to make sure that workers are trained and knowledgeable on both WHMIS 1988 and WHMIS 2015 labels. The training should also include what's contained on both WHMIS 1988 and WHMIS 2015 labels. Workers should be advised that they need to check for product labels prior to using hazardous products. They also need to be advised that they should actually read and follow all the information on the label. They need to know that if they don't understand the hazards associated with a product or how to protect themselves, they need to ask their supervisor immediately and not use the product. They also need to be told that they're required to request new labels whenever old ones are unreadable or do not exist. If you still haven't trained your workers, you can go ahead and use the free WHMIS 2015 training PowerPoint that you downloaded after signing up. If you want to go one step further and provide super simple to use, automated, and trackable training to your workers and save yourself a ton of time, EverSafe has a solution for you. EverSafe Media's WHMIS 2015 for Workers course teaches your workers everything they need to know about WHMIS 1988 and WHMIS 2015 labeling. This 60-minute dynamic course is modern, easy to use, and is highly interactive, keeping your workers engaged. There are a ton of ways to deploy the WHMIS course to your workers, including the hands-off approach using enrollment keys that I showed you in the last lesson. Here's the best part. Everything is trackable, including performance, how long it took to take the training, and real-time student progress. If you want to know who hasn't finished the course yet, simple, there's a report for that. If you need a list of workers that shows how everyone scored on the final exam, no problem, there's a report for that. There's so many more amazing benefits to using EverSafe that I'd love to tell you about, but we're just about out of time. So WHMIS 2015 labels provide a standardized and universally accepted way to ensure seamless communication of information about hazardous materials. The new labels are more comprehensive and display information more prominently, helping to reduce the risk of illness or injury. By shifting from the old WHMIS labels to the new labels, Canadian manufacturers, distributors, suppliers, employers, and workers not only reduce injuries and illnesses, but also boost international trade in hazardous materials and enable Canada to fulfill its international obligations. Stay tuned for the next lesson where we'll be covering hazard classification and the new WHMIS 2015 pictograms. Until next time, good luck, have fun, live safe.